Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in. Appreciate all the questions our listeners have been sending in, and please keep sending them in. Okay, I'll start us off from listener Josh. If the dollar was no longer the world's reserve currency, Noah posted recently about how it'd be a good thing for America if the dollar was no longer the world's reserve currency. Why? What are the upsides and downsides? And are there transition dangers, even if it's a desirable outcome in theory?
Right. So the good thing about the dollar not being a reserve currency, there's actually two good things. Number one, the United States' exports get cheaper. We can actually afford to sell stuff overseas. And the second thing is that the global financial system becomes less dependent on one country. So other countries get to sort of de-risk. If Donald Trump starts a civil war over losing an election or some crazy thing like that, then, they don't want all their assets to go poof. So, the dollar is always going to be one of several reserve currencies. But if there were other reserve currencies as well, like the euro and the yuan, if it was sort of shared among a basket of these, not only would it make a more sort of balanced export market, but it would also create less risk, financial risk, in terms of, one country sort of collapsing. Now that said, there are definitely dangers associated with the transition, financial turmoil. So, for example, how do you get from the dollar being reserve currency to some balanced sort of basket of currencies being reserve currency? You get there by people having less confidence in the United States financial system. Maybe that's one obvious way that you get there. You can also get there by people having more confidence in China and the euro, and everyone sort of agreeing happily to share responsibility and blah, 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 blah. That's obviously not what we do have. What we have instead is sort of a global financial anarchy where the United States has become the reserve currency by default, and people invest here simply because it's the best. Sometimes, in the Great Recession, everybody poured their money into dollars because even though here was the locus of the crisis, right? Here was here's where the crisis began. Yet everyone was investing in dollars because we were the worst house. We were the best house in a bad neighborhood. So there was this flight to safety. If that changed, if people, suddenly perceived the U.S. as not being as safe, you could get a lot of global financial chaos on the way to getting multiple reserve currencies, and you could get big sort of capital swings from one place to another that could be very disruptive to local economies. So that could be bad.
Yeah, it's interesting. When will we know that we are no longer the reserve currency? Like, what would need to happen? For that. When would we know we're not?
The reserve currency means the currency that countries hold their reserves in. So central banks around the world have reserves. They have assets built up, and the question is what denomination, what currency are those assets denominated in? So right now, central banks. The central bank of Guyana has a bunch of dollars. When I say they have a bunch of dollars, what I really mean is they have a bunch of treasury bonds and maybe agency bonds like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, those kind of bonds, but primarily treasury bonds. We call those dollars. Those are dollar denominated assets. Though they're holding a bunch of dollar denominated assets. That is when they start holding euro denominated assets or yuan, RMB denominated assets, then that will be when there are other reserve currencies.
Right. And we'd aspire for them to hold their own currency as opposed to, some other country becoming the world reserve currency. Right.
Right. So you get lots of benefits from having reserve currency. You basically get to borrow cheaply. But then the question is that worth the price of having our exports always be uncompetitive and hollowing out your industry? So that's kind of a problem for us.
Let's go to listener Gail Flynn. What is fair taxation? What do you consider to be fair taxation among the populace? Republicans claim we should not increase taxes on the wealthy as they are job creators, and by taxing them, our economy will suffer. I haven't seen evidence to support this claim, but they insist. What's going on here?
Well, so fair obviously is a matter of opinion. I think higher taxes on the rich are perfectly fair. Many people disagree, but I think, sort of there's this general idea that your taxes should be equal to the benefit received. And I think people have this positive self-attribution bias where they think that my wealth is due to me pulling myself up by my own bootstraps while everyone else's poverty is due to their own personal failings. Ha ha ha. But I think that in truth, the reason that you could be rich and succeed is largely because of the government. Government has created property rights, government has created laws, and government has created infrastructure and order and things like that. I mean, Elon Musk would not be Elon Musk in another country. Mark Zuckerberg would not be Mark Zuckerberg in another country. And so these people's vast fortunes have developed because of the institutions and, the business culture fostered over time by those institutions over, hundreds of years, but also maintained now through our system of property rights and our courts and our police and our army and all these other things. So rich people derive massive amounts of benefits just from being, rich in the United States. And I think that therefore asking them to pay more is fair. And so you'll notice that even Republicans who want a flat tax don't actually want a flat tax. They want a flat percentage tax. But a flat percentage tax means that if you're, Mark Zuckerberg, you're paying like a lot more than if you're just some random, store clerk, right? And so even that recognizes the idea that rich people should pay more. Even the so-called flat tax recognizes that rich people should pay more. So why not, why not rich people pay an even higher percentage? So the idea of progressive taxation. As for the negative effects of taxation, whether or not it, hurts the economy, that is, a thing that a lot of people say. But research says that tax rates have to get pretty high before that happens. So actually, we have scope to raise taxes from where we are now before we start to substantially hurt the economy. But you can get taxes so high that they do. In the models, of course, what happens is you tax people so high, they just say, well, you know what, I'm just going to sit around and be lazy and do nothing and not work. In the real world, what happens is they say, I'm going to spend ridiculous amounts of money sheltering my income from taxes. And so, in fact, in some European countries like France, you do see this happening. You see French people, working very hard to shield their income from high taxes. And France dropped its super tax, on super high incomes, partly because everyone was working so hard to evade it. Remember that money that rich people spend to evade taxes or, avoid taxes legally or evade taxes illegally even is social waste. This is waste, right? This is wasted resources, the wasted resources of accountants and smart people and stuff. So if everyone's just spending all their, time and money and effort and brain power, evading the tax system, then that is our society is being wasteful. So you actually do get to waste when you get very high tax rates. But we're probably not close to there yet in America. Anyway, that's the basic answer.
This is related to Chris Peel's question. Chris Peel asks, is there some level of redistribution in the US that is higher than at present that would raise the wealth of all? And how should we think about that?
Well, okay, so the question, the wealth of all, if you're going to raise the wealth of all via redistribution, that's a very interesting question as to whether or not you can ever actually do that. And in fact, no one knows the answer to that question. The way that would happen is, for example, you tax the rich to create some, health programs that make a healthier workforce, that become a more productive workforce, and your country's actual GDP goes up instead of, so that theoretically can happen, but I don't know of any good evidence that does happen, for countries like us. I think that if you have a country that's very poor, where some, where a little extra income will obviously make people a lot healthier, or cause them to get a little bit better education or move around a little bit more, something like that. Like in a very poor country, I think that you probably will see some redistribution, just pure redistribution, actually raise GDP. I think you could. I do not think you will in the United States. I think in the United States, if you just take money from, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and you give it to just some, random people, that could be good for people, but I don't think it's going to raise productivity a lot. I think that instead, if you want to raise productivity, you have to tax people and spend it on public goods, productive public goods. So infrastructure, research, and things like that. So basically you have to spend the money that you get from taxing people on stuff that, concrete stuff that actually raises GDP. So the question is, do we have the political will, et cetera, to do that? Or are we just going to waste that money when we would we be better off just mailing people checks like a basic income? Or are we better off trying to build productive goods, build highways, build trains, build, improve schools, things like that? And that's obviously a big debate. And I think there actually is lots of room to scope to improve public goods from where we are. But a lot of other people say, no, you should just do basic income. I think that's a debate that hasn't really been resolved.
Yeah. That's related to a question by Jeremy. He says, in your recent piece about Latin America, you talk about how they lowered inequality by increasing economic growth. What is the kind of economic growth that increases inequality versus the kind that decreases inequality? How should we think about that?
Right. So that's an incredibly good question. In fact, my name is Smith. My family changed it from Kuznets, actually Kuznets in Russian. But Kuznets is that name, and we may be related, in fact, to a guy named Simon Kuznets, who was an old economist, 100 years ago, and who invented GDP. Actually, invented the notion of GDP, and he also invented a thing called the Kuznets curve, which says that as a country gets richer, it first gets more unequal and then gets more equal later as it gets richer. And for a long time, people thought that this was just an absolute iron law of the world, and now we think that this may not actually be true, or there may be a double Kuznets curve where it bends back again. The basic idea is that when you have a country first start to get rich, some people get rich first. And I think that's a Deng Xiaoping quote, very accurate, timely quote from Deng Xiaoping. But because some people get rich first because, the entrepreneurs who build the railroads and the houses and all the early industrialization stuff, those people are going to get rich. And even though, everyone's getting higher income, there's going to be a few people who just build out the basics of the, infrastructure and industry and all that stuff, like the John D. Rockefellers and the Andrew Carnegies and those guys, in the Henry Fords of the early days of industrialization, and those guys are going to get rich, and you're going to have this big inequality, and then later on, workers are going to get their fair share. You're going to have the Walter Reuthers and the UAWs and the Teamsters and the AFL-CIOs are going to pull up. They're going to say, "Hey, we deserve our fair share," and then they're going to pull up the basic income. That pull up the income of regular workers. And then you have the Kuznets curve, decreasing inequality as growth increases because workers are able to appropriate more and more of the surplus. Now, we may see something on the far side of that curve where eventually a country actually deindustrializes and then an economy gets financialized, and you see a bunch of hedge fundies or whatever just get rich. And so there's a debate about that. Obviously that's the Piketty theory. Right. It's the idea that, okay, once your economy gets very advanced, then, you start moving from industry into finance, and then your finance bros take all your money. Your hedge fund bros just appropriate all the money, and then you have to have government sort of redistribute the money from the hedge fund bros because there's no natural force that counteracts the hedge fund bros. And so that's sort of that's another story you can tell. Whether or not that's actually true, whether or not that's actually an accurate description of what happens, or whether or not there's just sort of swings and bounces and stuff, so Piketty actually thinks that, there's swings in inequality where you have big upheavals where society says, no, we demand that rich people not have all the money, and then they redistribute. And then sort of over time, everybody ignores the fact that the rich people's, share of national income or wealth is creeping up and up, and they're getting richer and richer, and they're appropriating more and more of the wealth, and people ignore that. And then so eventually we reach a breaking point where everyone goes, rah, no, redistribute. And then you have either a, big upheaval, civil war, or maybe a major war, or an economic catastrophe, Great Depression kind of New Deal sort of situation. But then after the dust settles, you have a more equal society, and then the cycle begins again. So that's another theory as well. What kind of growth creates lower inequality? The answer is, what kind of growth creates lower inequality without government redistribution, without the government having to, sort of step in? And the answer is raising productivity for normal people. We've gotten into this mode of thinking that productivity doesn't actually raise wages, that people, become more productive, but companies appropriate all the, fruits of their labors. That's not really true. The famous graph that you've seen doesn't actually show that, because it's just a median compared with an average. It's actually just a graph of wage inequality. If you've seen that graph, and I should do a post about that soon. But basically, The idea is if you raise the productivity of the average person, you've seen that graph, right, Erik? The graph of productivity goes up.
Yeah, this is the one from the
Economic Policy Institute.
From the 70s?
Right. So it's what the fuck happened in 1971? The productivity and wages diverge. Well, you'll notice that if you look at that graph over the years, it has evolved substantially. So first, they had, wages basically flatline because they were using wages without benefits, right? And so then they increased benefits, and then the two drew closer together. And then people said, oh, you're actually using different inflation measures. So they're like, okay, let's use the same inflation measure. So then they go closer together, and you still have this divergence, but then they're closer together. And then almost all the remaining divergence is accounted for by median versus mean. One of those, is like basically a median, and the other is a mean. So essentially, top end workers have been getting all the labor income. But then, there is actually divergence, but it emerged pretty much since 2000 and has been not as huge as people think. And it's mostly related to overseas income. So overseas income and land. So companies actually have gotten a lot more, capital is getting a lot more income for two reasons. Number one, companies are selling stuff overseas more. And number two, land is becoming very important. Companies own a bunch of real estate, and that real estate's getting more valuable. And so that is really, the housing shortage. So you're looking at wage inequality and the housing shortage in one tricky, sneaky graph when you look at those two things. But the basic answer is that the best way to build, to increase economic growth in a way that builds productivity, in a way that doesn't foster inequality, is to build productivity, is to make your average worker better educated, to improve the allocation of labor so workers can go to where they're needed more, to improve technology so that each worker can leverage technology more, so that if you have, each worker with a robot instead of like just a shovel, that will increase economic growth in a sort of a broad-based way. But that's, if you look at countries that have low inequality, like in Sweden or whatever, they do redistribution as well. And not just redistribution, they tax people to provide public goods a lot, which is, I wouldn't even call redistribution. So they have a very activist government, in addition to having sort of business-friendly policies that allow companies to accumulate lots of capital, to use lots of robots. So if you go to the Netherlands, their ports are completely automated, and yet they've got this great welfare state. So they let companies do what they need to do to make the money, and they don't say, no, you can't install robots because it's going to take jobs away from normal people. They're like, no, actually, put those robots in. And then, and then at the end of the day, they so they actually have lower market inequality because they have higher, sort of per hour productivity. Well, I guess it's about the same, but they redistribute more at the end of the day as well. They're very productive, and then they redistribute more. They have a more generous welfare state at the end of the day, and that welfare state does not impoverish them. They are not poor. It can be a pain in the ass to pay Swedish taxes or whatever, or Dutch taxes, Danish taxes, but at the end of the day, they are not poor people. It's a wealthy society, and part of that is because they don't try to do de facto redistribution by restraining what businesses are allowed to do. They give business a fairly free hand and then redistribute later. So that's a more efficient kind of model. Anyway, let's do next question.
Thanks for the good question, Jeremy. We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. If you don't already subscribe to Turpentine's industry-leading newsletters, like our new daily AI newsletter, Emergent Behavior, or Media Empires, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power these newsletters is called Beehiiv, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business, and they built Beehiiv to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails. From essayists to business owners, the platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. Beehiiv has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The Beehiiv platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, the Lindy newsletter, and so many more. Beehiiv's founder hooked up Moment of Zen listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code MOZ. Visit beehiiv.com, that's BEEHIIV.com, to get started. Over 100 startups launched today. Do you know who they are? If you're not seeing interesting startups, none of your downstream processes matter. How you source deals at the earliest stages could be your most consequential investment. Harmonic is the most complete startup database, finding new companies as soon as they incorporate and tracking them through IPO. You can create a search tailored to your investment thesis. In one search, filter over company data, including venture stage, industry, and geography, founders and operators' backgrounds, and traction metrics like headcount changes, social media audience, and web traffic growth. Importantly, Harmonic instantly surfaces warm connections to help you connect with founders. The results are delivered on autopilot, wherever you most need them, over Slack, email, or via API, directly into your CRM, integrating seamlessly into your software stack. Learn why Craft, Bedrock, NEA, and hundreds more trust Harmonic's data by visiting harmonic.ai or use the link in the description. Make sure you mention our podcast, Turpentine VC, during your demo. This one is from listener K.orr, O-R-R. It's a big question. How would you fix... Yes, exactly. How would you fix education? How would Noah remake K through 12 colleges, and grad school in light of AI, changing industrial needs, the interwebs, etc.?
Right. Well, so I don't actually know because, efforts that we've made to do this have failed. We had the MOOCs, which are massive open online classes or something like that, failed. Basically, like some people took them, but they didn't substitute for anything, and people kind of drifted away. And when we do experiments on what instruction methods work best, by far the best working one is called direct instruction, which is you have a teacher stand in front of a class and write something on a board, and then the students write it down. That is actually the best method. We've found this long ago, and it's still the best thing we've ever found. So actually our schools are, probably the best they can be without, harnessing AI, in my opinion. So that's actually wrong. So there's actually some schools that, our schools for poor people do suck. But the reason they suck is because they're highly chaotic and no one can learn because it's a disruptive environment, because poor schools have a lot of people running around beating people up and shouting and screaming, and there's no order and blah, blah, blah. And so basically, what charter schools do is they put everybody in a uniform, and they say, maybe some even segregate genders. And then they're just like, okay, everybody march in line, blah, blah, blah. Now take this test, and now it's time to meditate, and and they really regiment people, and you see performance go up a lot for poor kids. But, it's not through educational instructional methods. It's really just because they do not have, just a few disruptive kids who, essentially use the school as jail. Right. And so removing disruptive kids is very helpful, very important. Basically, giving poor kids more time and attention on an individual basis is very effective. United States' schools, actually on tests, people think that we do really badly on tests, and on math we actually do fairly badly, but we actually don't do that badly. So we have a lot of inequality. But so, for example, Asian Americans on these, international standardized tests will defeat people from China, Singapore, any other country you ever want to meet. White Americans will defeat people from almost any other country. But even, Black and Hispanic Americans are lower down. And, this reflects America's inequalities. But they still do really well. They're beating tons. Black and Hispanic Americans beat lots of European countries, right, in terms of these tests. And so they're not, we don't suck. We just have an unequal system. And also, you also see that Americans are highly unmotivated because there's tons and tons of evidence that when you pay American kids to learn more, they suddenly do a lot better. And so even those, even our international test performance that exists now, when you pay Americans, they'll just do better on tests, including poor people. And so we're under incentivized. We don't have incentives to learn. So motivating kids is a big problem. I think a lot of that motivation comes from parents. When you see nerdy kids, nerds are people who are just very close to their parents. Their parents are like, here's a book. Don't go out playing with those, those kids. You got to stay inside and study. And that's what a nerd is, right? And those are the kids who succeed scholastically. And those are the kids who show up most prepared academically on the day, oh, it's time for math class. Well, then, wow, this kid does really well. Why? Because they're a nerd whose parents, sat them down and offered to teach them stuff from an early age, when everyone else's parents were just like, here's $5, go get a Coke and stay out of my hair, or like poor people who are like, mom's got to go to work, so bye, have fun. I'll be back from work sometime, maybe. And so then so you have these preparation, inequalities that manifest themselves as classroom inequalities that we then interpret as ability. We say, oh, these are the kids with the high IQ. These are the smart, naturally kids who are born smart. Sucks to suck, smart genes. Great. Yay. And so then we do that. And then we just assume these inequalities are natural and school doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. It's a really toxic attitude. Whereas in Japan, it's like, okay, now you've got to try hard. You've got to learn it, fine, you're poor. Well, try hard in school and, do this step by step and work really hard, and maybe you'll get better. And you still have disparities in who's good at math. There is some inborn ability, obviously, right? Like your average person off the street is not going to be Terrence Tao. People who suck at math could do a lot in America, could do a lot better if they just were motivated, worked hard, and weren't afraid of it, and didn't think that it's, they naturally suck. All these people are like, oh, I'm not a math person. I want to. No, you're a math person. Everyone is a math person, to some degree, and you can do it. Calculus is a thing that almost anybody without like a severe learning disability, maybe not, but like almost anybody can do math up to that level, up to the level of algebra and calculus, like the high school stuff we do. Pretty much like almost anyone in America can do that. Some people take a little more time. Now, I will say that the one type of educational technique that blows everything else out of the water consistently again and again is one-on-one tutoring. Tutoring is better than direct instruction. Tutoring is better than a classroom. Tutoring really wins. And can AI be a tutor, a one-on-one tutor in your pocket? Can we get ChatGPT to become this like, magic genie in the little like, iPad or whatever that just like walks you through how to like be confident about doing algebra step by step, and then suddenly poor people do a lot better and discover all this talent that we didn't discover before? That's the plot of the first half of Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age, and which is a very good first half of a book. I can't speak for the second half; it's not as good. But read the first half of The Diamond Age, and you'll read the sort of the great hope of education. Educational technologies to have AI do one-on-one tutoring, because we know that individual tutors raise performance a crap ton in real life. The question is whether we can get AI to do that. Without AI doing individual tutoring, I am less optimistic about the possibility of that new technology will help. I think especially online learning has proven to be a big bust. During COVID, we had this great natural experiment where everyone went to school on Zoom, and it was terrible and nobody learned anything and it sucked. It's like we forced MOOCs on people for like a year and they didn't learn a goddamn thing. And so we found out that online learning doesn't work. The internet sucks for education. The internet's great if you're a self-motivated self-starter who wants to learn how to program in Python. Great. But the internet absolutely sucks, in terms of replacing direct instruction in schools. And so I do have a lot of hope for AI tutors, but I think that is what it's going to take.
Yeah. Thank God I didn't go to college during COVID. Oh my God. This one,
probably crappy parties too.
Yeah, exactly. This next question is from Dr. Noah Mehr, Mehr. Noah writes,
hello, fellow Noah.
Yes, another Noah. Noah writes, I'm a physician and I enjoyed your healthcare discussion the other week. Hearing about administrative bloat and increase in hospital costs for just about everything really hit home. Meanwhile, as physicians, we've seen our salaries go down while hospitals ask us to do and bill more often, providing patients with less time and worse care. You mentioned we will need to get costs down, but I'm wondering how exactly you think this will need to be done. What specifically are the levers that the government or anyone can do to fix the situation? If you were magically in charge, what would the steps be that you take?
Okay, so the answer is, how do we increase productivity, within the medical system? I have no idea. I do not understand the medical system and how it works enough to do that. I think portable paperwork is just an obvious gimme. Why should I have to fill out the same goddamn intake form, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's privacy. This person can't see you. I don't care. I don't care if this doctor also knows that I have a bad neck. Like I have a screwed up disc in my neck at C5, C6. I don't care. Audience, you know that now. You know my deepest, darkest secret, herniated cervical disc at C5, C6. I don't care. Like anyone can know that. It's fine. Like I don't need to fill out the goddamn intake form one more time when I go to see, the doctor again. And so portable paperwork, obviously, changing our idea of what constitutes privacy. The idea is that if we need to view the medical system as a unified thing where if one doctor knows your pre-existing conditions, all doctors automatically know, we need to be okay with that. So that's one thing. And that's just a culture, values, traditions, bullshit. But here I repeat myself. And so the other thing we need to do, there's a lot of monopoly power in the healthcare system. There was just a really good paper that came out about hidden profits by hospitals. You have these hospitals that are nonprofits and everyone's like, oh, we'll just go to the nonprofit hospital. Well, the hospital actually has a bunch of, there's a bunch makes profit a bunch of ways. There'll be a for-profit company affiliated with it that owns the land, and then you provide more services and the land value goes up. Or there's a bunch of different things you can do to sort of extract this money, not to mention just like straight up paying your executives and not calling it profit. But then there's the profits of like technology providers, people who sell you the pillow. He's like, oh, we're the designated pillow salesman. Here's a really expensive pillow. Great. Now we have a bunch of profit and now I get to live in the Hamptons. Great. One what's responsible for getting rid of that is a national health insurance system. So what Japan and Korea do, they have a national health insurance system that pays part of everything. So they typically, national health insurance will pay 70% of every cost. But for the remainder, you've got to get private health insurance or pay out of pocket if you're a rich person. So, but otherwise you can just buy private health insurance, and that's fine. And people do that. So you have a role for private health insurance. And by the way, the need to buy private health insurance and the existence of things like deductibles and copays, right? There does actually help keep costs down. So you actually do have substantial cost sharing. At the same time, the government has its finger in every pie. That the national health insurance system gets to have a say on the negotiation of every healthcare service price. And this keeps prices very low because you have this because imagine if the Medicare system just got a chance to be the primary negotiator on every service that everyone got for healthcare, even though it wasn't the only one who paid, but it was the main one who negotiated. And then right now, health insurance companies do a terrible job of negotiating prices down. They do not have the scale, and they do not have the internal infrastructure and skill to know what every procedure ought to cost. They can't police, they don't know how much this hospital pillows and this and that sort of outpatient service will cost, right? So they're always haggling over, they're like, oh my God, we just got billed $14,000 for this little procedure. What are we going to do? Well, we're only going to pay $2,000 of it, and that's how they negotiate, right? And these little insurers negotiating with these providers that they don't know, they can't monitor, blah, blah, blah. The government is a leviathan. It's like Kaiser Permanente for the whole country. And it's just like, guess what? Here's how much you get to charge. And, of course, the government can't push prices infinitely down this way, but you can squeeze a lot of the monopoly power out of the system by having sort of a designated monopsony, by having this government come in and pay 70% of everything. How does America get there? Well, the easy answer is we just use the Medicare system. We have this system. It already negotiates prices very well. If you look at the price that Medicare gets for a specific healthcare service versus the price that a private insurer will get for that same service, you see that Medicare gets a better price. And so what do? We just have Medicare do that for everybody instead of just for old people. Done. You could even call it Medicare for all, except the problem is that Bernie Sanders and a whole bunch of socialists have decided that the Medicare for all actually means a system where you ban private health insurance, which Japan and Korea do not do. So what we should do is take the existing Medicare system and use it to cover everybody instead of, and maybe then later afterwards, after, the Bernie people have coped and seethed for a while, maybe we can then retroactively call it Medicare for all. But the problem is they appropriated that name to mean something else. Anyway, taking the actual Medicare system and having it negotiated on behalf of absolutely everybody in the country is a way to squeeze a lot of monopoly power out of the system. So those two things, portable paperwork and actual Medicare for all, are the two things that I think would happen. But there's a lot of other productivity improvements in the system there to be done, and I honestly just don't know what any of those are. And so that's outside of my expertise.
Thank you, Dr. Noah, for the question. Let's move on to listener Jacob Capo, C-A-P-O, Capo. He says,
right.
I would love for you
Capo
guys...
di tutti capi. That's
exactly.
Anyway.
Jacob asks, what do you think about UBI?
UBI is so having UBI actually replace jobs. You read the science fiction novels and your regular person who's not in a spaceship or whatever is just like, oh, I'm on basic, right? It's like everyone says this, I'm on basic in the sci-fi novels, right? And because there's this idea that everybody just has this basic income because robots produce so much that only a few people have jobs and everyone else is on basic. We can't do that, right? We can't afford that. It's too difficult for the government redistributing to that degree, just to regular middle class people, would be absolutely ruinous to our fiscal system. It would also probably incentivize a lot of people not to work. So we have a lot of research on direct cash transfers, and we find that when direct cash transfers are like a portion of your income, you get you make $60,000 a year and then you get $10,000 extra dollars a year from the government or something like that. It doesn't cause anybody to stop working because you can't really substitute basic income for work. It's just a complement, right? It's a supplement, not a substitute. Once you start getting to very high levels where you can actually afford to make a decent living not working at all, Then things change, and then people are like, why am I working? And then so we can't, basically the idea of having this basic income where robots produce everything, and most humans are just taking leisure, and then you have a few people who are just fabulously productive because of those are the Star Trek Captain Picard, whatever, with the special talents who can, and then maybe we pay those people a lot, or maybe they do it like Star Trek out of the goodness of their heart, or just whatever, because they've re-engineered their brains to actually just want to work all the time. I don't know. That's science fiction. That's not coming soon. Nobody's going to do that. We shouldn't do that. It's not the kind of policy we should be contemplating. However, all that research that shows that you can give people like, $8,000 a year and it just makes their life easier. Well, that we can do. So we can do a basic income that supplements your income. We can't do a basic income that substitutes your income. We have a lot of data now. We're getting data all the time that shows. By the way, I'm going to a Hewlett Foundation conference about this tomorrow. So this is a very timely question. I'm about to go to this thing in Sausalito, and we're going to talk about basic income and stuff. But I think it's essentially a solved problem. Like, we know that we can look at the Alaska Permanent Fund. The Alaska Permanent Fund is a sovereign wealth fund for Alaska that's not sovereign. It's a social wealth fund for the state of Alaska. That basically takes all their resource revenues, their mining and oil revenues and all that stuff, and it just hands people a check, right? It mails people a check. Now, it's a variable check depending on how high resource prices are that year, right? So it's not like they don't guarantee it, so they don't go into debt when there's a year of low resource prices, right? You just get less money. But it's a supplement, not a substitute to income, so it's fine, right? You get a check every year. And what they show is that people just spend this on. People don't work any less when they get these supplementary checks, right? They don't work any less, because would you stop working if you got an $8,000 check in the mail? I wouldn't. That wouldn't change my behavior at all, right? I would save it, or I'd buy more stuff for my rabbits. But then, if I were poor, I would just, and my rabbits were like really going hungry, I would like to spend more on the rabbits. And of course, for most people, that's kids. So primarily people spend on kids. They also spend it on, they don't spend it on drugs, primarily. Yes, you'll have like a few addicts who will like spend everything they make on fentanyl, right? That's real, but it's not widespread. It's not common, right? You have a few people who are alcoholics. This is not a common behavior. It's simply behavior that people who don't like the poor point to and say, oh, you poor people, you suck. You don't deserve money. So in fact, everybody could use $5,000, $8,000 extra dollars a year. Right. And it's not going to hurt anybody. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just going to cost money to the government. So the question is, what do we then do? So you have libertarians who say, okay, we're going to cut other types of welfare programs in order to fund the simple cash welfare program. And then you have progressives who are like, no, we're going to put this on top of the existing welfare programs. But I think everyone agrees it's a good idea, and how you pay for it is a big bone of contention.
Yeah. Thank you, Jacob. Let's transition to Gwyn Beehiiv, Beeff. Beef.
Hi.
Gwyn asks.
Yes, I'm trying to think of an acronym like Best Friends Forever, but with an IE.
Yes. Exactly.
I'll think of that later. Anyway.
Exactly. Gwyn asks.
so part of the rapid fire is that I actually just make fun of everybody's name. Yes. Sorry. I love you all. I love you have great names. They're all much more interesting than Noah Smith, which is an incredibly boring generic name.
Yes.
Anyway,
please keep submitting your full names, guys. Okay. Gwyn asks, is it counterproductive for the U.S. to take policy measures to increase our industrial manufacturing capacity? You've pointed out the massive gap between current U.S. manufacturing capacity and China's, and the imperative of friendshoring to prepare for and deter armed conflict. Yet it seems that measures to boost our capacity often undermine diplomatic relations crucial to friendshoring. For example, green energy subsidies in the IRA were met with hostility in the EU. Subsidizing or protecting domestic industries will often be perceived as harmful to other allied countries' industries. Can we enact policies to boost our manufacturing while still pursuing the greater imperative of friendshoring, or should we forego these policies to avoid undermining that higher goal?
Wow, I love this question. This is like my favorite question. We've got to have you on the show more. Yes. So we should have I just had an idea. We should have like a sweepstakes where people who write really good questions come on as guests.
Perfect.
We have like a question of the month award where someone comes on as a guest or something. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, all right, we'll talk about that later. But okay, so let's answer this question. This is an incredibly important question. Yes. So to some degree, competition between us, Germany, Korea, and all these people is healthy, but I think that you quickly get into unhealthy, realm here. And you get, because there's a lot of things we need to coordinate with Germany and Korea and Japan and all these countries on, if we're going to actually, because our country is so much smaller than China and their countries are so much smaller than China, that in the long run, we need a unified common market among non-China developed democracies if we're going to beat China. And we need the rich countries to act more like one country than a whole bunch of disparate countries. We need to unify. The reason is so that companies who, have to choose between the democracy markets and China market will have a big choice to make, right? In the past, the American market was so big that we could go toe to toe with China one-on-one. We can't really anymore. We're too small. We can to some degree, but countries that are forced to choose between America and China will often now just choose China. Not always. Sometimes they'll choose America, but it's no longer a slam dunk anymore. So we need to sort of unify our markets with these other with Germany and with Korea and with Japan. So we have like this one gigantic market. Eventually, we're going to have to do that with India, and that's a conversation that no one wants to have yet. But we'll talk about that another day. But okay, so what do we do to avoid pissing off, our allied countries, and what do we do to encourage friendshoring? What we basically do is that if we do tariffs, we should do those tariffs specifically on China and maybe on China allied countries, but China hoards all its manufacturing for itself. You don't see China investing, in Pakistan. You don't see China in investing a lot in Russia. They just use them for natural resources, or Iran, or any of these countries. So effectively, it's just China. Now, just China is, a fifth of the world. So it's a big just, right? So anyway, if we have tariffs, we need to put those tariffs on China. If we have subsidies for our vehicles, so for electric cars, we need to say, okay, so South Korea, if you make electric cars in America, you get those subsidies too, right? And then we also have to have a lower subsidy that we give to cars that are from countries that are not China that sell stuff here for the purpose of climate change. So, for example, if Hyundai makes it makes an EV in Korea and sells it in America, we should subsidize that, but less than an EV that Hyundai makes in America. And there should be no difference between subsidies for Fords made in America and Hyundai's made in America. Those should have the same subsidy. So we should have a partial subsidy for green technologies that are made elsewhere but are not China. So China, no subsidy for you at all. In fact, you get a tariff because you decided to be jerks, and you decided to have this like contest of powers, great changes unseen in a century. Well, that we're not going to just sit around and let you hollow out our industrial base after you say that and make it clear that you're like, we're anti-West, we'll overthrow you, and also buy our stuff and give us subsidies. No, none for you. So, but then for South Korea, obviously you're our ally. We want you to have a strong economy. We need to, we eventually, for a lot of things, we need industries that aren't of direct strategic relevance, where we say we don't, it's not necessarily important that we have this in America, right? I think most industries are that way. And so I think that we should also give subsidies for friendshoring. So in other words, if you want to do nickel processing, well, nickel processing is not a thing we need in the United States necessarily. But we could put nickel processing in India or something. But then, it's a friendly country. But so then we should give incentives to do that. And we shouldn't have incentives that try to pull nickel processing from India to America. So I'd say that there's a few industries that we want to have like in the US specifically, maybe some chip stuff that we really, really worry about getting regionally disrupted. And the reason, by the way, is not because America is bad or America, the reason is because Korea could get blockaded by China, right? Japan could potentially get blockaded by China in the event of a war, where America is not going to get blockaded to America, right? China can't stop. They'll try to hack our trains and run barges into bridges and stuff to stop us moving things around our country in the event of a war, but they won't be able to stop us moving things from Nebraska to Michigan or whatever. So there are some things for security purposes that we need on American soil, or maybe in Mexico and Canada, right? But a lot of things we should minimize the disparity between the degree to which we subsidize moving things out of China to the United States and the degree to which we subsidize moving things out of China to Korea and India, all right, or whatever. Friendshoring should take precedence over reshoring, because ultimately we're going to need to be one common market with those allied countries if we're going to stand up to China. That is an unsatisfactory answer because there's a lot of specific policies about what that common market would look like. It's sort of the grand economic policy of the future that will involve like insane amount of compromises, and the actual operationalization of that, there will be lots of fighting over it and people will be really mad over various things. But then in the future, we'll all be richer for it. And it's a larger thing that I can tackle right now, but rest assured, this is a big part of what industrial policy people are thinking about. So that's a really, really good question. It's too good for me to answer in full right now, but I hope that gives sort of the sketch of the beginning of an answer.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you, Gwyn. Let's segue to Job Gregory, who's asked a good question in the past too. Job asked...
Wait, spelled Job like from Arrested Development?
Job.
Oh, Job. All right.
Yes.
I think we've had him before. I just always have to know yes. if it's like Job.
Job asks, if Ireland is the gateway of US FDI to Europe and Singapore to East Asia, which country will be the analog for Africa? Is there one already? If not, who should be vying for this wildcard path to rich country status?
This is the greatest. I love this question, Job. You're awesome. This is so good. I've written actually multiple posts about why Africa needs a country like this. What is that country going to be? That country. So there's the outside chance that someone will create like a Singapore of Africa. By the way, one of Africa's great disadvantages economically is this incredibly smooth coastline. There are very few natural countries in Africa because you have this incredibly, like, look at a map of Europe and Asia versus Africa. Asia, it's like dur, 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 dur. Europe, it's like dur, 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 dur. Africa, it's like very smooth, right? Only the video people will get to see me actually draw lines in the air. But Africa has this very smooth coastline, so you don't have countries that are naturally isolated like Spain, like Italy, like Greece, like Korea, like Malaysia, like all these, Japan, all these countries, you just don't see it. Madagascar is the only one. And Madagascar is really just more like part of the Indian Ocean because the actual livable coast of Madagascar faces away from Africa. So it's not going to be Madagascar. Where is it going to be? Well, there's a couple contenders. One problem is that often these contenders have a lot of natural resources. So Botswana would be definitely a contender for that. Botswana already, they're the diamond trade. If you rip the face mask off De Beers, a diamond is forever. Underneath it's Botswana because Botswana owns a bunch of De Beers and that's one of the great successes of resource nationalism in the world, by the way, is Botswana taking control of its diamond mines from De Beers and basically making De Beers their subsidiary. But Botswana is a great country to live in. It's really nice. It's got a bunch of nice houses and it's got great education and blah blah, great healthcare and stuff because this, a diamond is forever and that's where the diamonds come from. You're like, oh, blood diamonds, conflict diamonds. It's actually just like Botswana middle class diamonds. Okay. They also have very nice parks where you can like pet a little lion cub. It's really cute. I want to go there. So Botswana is a possibility. I would put my money on Ghana. Ghana is closer to America. It is in West Africa. It has Ghana is basically secure. There's no, its neighbors are all small and there's no neighbors who want to conquer it. It doesn't have, it's ethnically a lot more homogeneous. Most people, Americans have no idea of ethnic groups in Africa. They're like, well, I think there's black people in Africa. Yeah, okay, fine. But Africa has many, many ethnic divisions. We know that like French and German people fight, but we haven't heard, now we know that like Hutu and Tutsi people historically, fight to some degree, but then there's all these things, right? There's like Igbo versus Yoruba and Hausa in Nigeria. There's all these ethnic conflicts in Africa that we Americans just have no idea about. Unless you're a grad student who studies Africa or something, unless you read obsessively a lot of Wikipedia like me. So in Ghana, almost everybody is Akan. It's just an ethnic group. And so Ghana has Ghana has a lot of natural resources. It has a lot of gold. It's the Gold Coast. I think that was even an old name for Ghana, or at least something of land that was near Ghana. But there was the Gold Coast was right there, and you'd sell a lot of gold. Ghana has a lot of gold, but Ghana has a lot more room. It's a lot poorer than Botswana, so it has a lot more room to grow. And it has basically Ghana could become this financial hub of Africa. Ghana could become the Singapore. It's not that large, and it's actually got much better education than the countries around it. And so Ghana and Botswana, Botswana is also very ethnically homogeneous. Everybody is kind of Tswana, right? That's the ethnic group in Botswana. Funny enough, like French people are French, Botswanan people are Tswanan. But anyway, but then so it's like that. So it's really, you know, sort of more of an ethno state, and this is free them from some of the destructive sort of inter-ethnic wars and politics that other countries have suffered in their region. Ghana is similar, but you know, they're secure against internal threat. Ghana is not going to have a civil war, right? Ghana also, they're going to be able to spend on public goods because you don't have like a lot of like special interest groups just fighting for payouts. Imagine like, you know, the problem where, you know, you have Democrats in big cities in the United States where you have the groups, they call them, where it's like, you know, a whole bunch of special interest groups that don't necessarily represent the communities that they claim to represent, but they just ask for payouts for their community. And then the Democrats just allocate money between the groups that claim to represent these communities. Instead, they just pay out their nonprofit you know, execs and their nonprofit, highly paid nonprofit workers who then block housing in their neighborhoods. We're talking about San Francisco, obviously, but then this is the big problem with the Democrats in America. Imagine this problem times 100. Imagine this at the level of a whole country, and you get a lot of countries in Africa because when the colonialists mix them up into these jumbled mixes, or sometimes not the colonialists' fault. Sometimes it's just local empires' fault. So like in Ethiopia, you have, you know, Ethiopia is like basically an empire, where ethnic groups within that empire kind of fight each other a lot and occasionally have a civil war. Well, Ghana has none of this. Ghana's great. Also, Ghana has a lot of connections to America because Ghana has very consciously tried to kind of sell itself as the ersatz ancestral land of Black Americans. You know, so Black Americans obviously were robbed of their heritage by slavery and et cetera, et cetera. So like you can't go to like the old country and see where the you know, find your roots. You know, your roots are like all over Africa, right? But then Ghana has sort of become like, you know, Ghana has like the year of return that they do, and they have all these like festivals that they do that are really honestly great. Like they have some amazing like fashion, music festivals, art festivals, and just like creative Black Americans will go there and just like contribute to these festivals, but also just enjoy these festivals. And so it functions, that's sort of similar to what Taiwan kind of does for like Asian Americans in a way, becoming an ersatz, because, you know, for a lot of Asian Americans, it's also because you maybe couldn't go back to your actual ancestral country, China, because they're kind of repressive, but for different reasons. But Ghana can leverage that. So it can leverage a lot of American talent and capital, you know, for connections and things like that. So I believe that Ghana is the best position to be the Singapore of Africa. And so really they just, you know, they need to get on this. Like they need, like finance in Ghana needs to happen, and they need to develop close links with Singapore so that Singapore could sort of teach them how to be a Singapore. So then I think, or Ireland. So I think, you know, like Ghana could be the Singapore / Ireland of at least West Africa, possibly of all of Africa someday.
Yeah. Thank you, Job. Great question. Gearing towards the end here. Here's a question from listener Ian Moffat or Moffitt. It's Moffit.
Let's say Ian Moffat.
Okay, Ian Moffat. Ian asks, what has the impact been of foreign aid from an economic perspective?
That's a great question. So foreign aid can make institutions worse because people rely on foreign aid instead of building up their own stuff. And foreign aid can often get funneled and captured by corrupt elites who then use the aid money that they siphon off to stay in power. Foreign aid can also be good because it relieves constraints on poor people and allows poor people to go get an education, start a small business, blah, blah, blah. Empirical papers argue back and forth about whether foreign aid is good or bad. And basically, it appears to be good in some countries and bad in other countries. And the countries that it's better in probably need it a little bit less because they were functional in the first place. So we try to do all this stupid shit with like strings attached, like, okay, and then you have to, and then you have to have all these, Europeans come in and just manage this, blah, blah, blah. Or like, American white college graduates who are on like their gap year has to come in and like manage your education system, or we won't disperse the aid. And like, that's kind of stupid. And then do these conditions work? Well, maybe a little. I think the big proponents of foreign aid, like Bono, have moved toward thinking that investment is actually much more important. So if we're talking about like Africa, which is Africa is where most of the foreign aid is going to go, and Africa is where most of the poverty, the real desperate, poverty still exists in the world. So we're really talking about Africa. And then what's more important is for us to buy African stuff to provide jobs in Africa. So there's this agreement called AGOA, that is basically an agreement for us to preferentially buy African-made stuff. Okay. And sometimes a lot of times that stuff is made by Chinese-owned factories. So Chinese people from like, mostly from the south of China who like, they can't really have a shirt factory in China anymore because it costs too much, because Chinese wages are too high. And because, they were dumping stuff in the river, and the Chinese Communist Party is like, okay, I guess you can't dump stuff in the river anymore. Very belatedly, but then like, okay, where can I go to pay low wages, dump stuff in the river, and boss people around? Africa. Well, that sounds like a really bad deal until you realize that the alternative is being insanely poor on a farm and having nothing to do and then starving. So relative development here, people. Like, you got to think about like the alternatives. What's the alternative going to be? We're like, oh God, a sweatshop. You're working 10 hours a day putting together flip-flops. Oh, it's so horrible. Well, like, consider not working anything. I mean, like, you've got to start somewhere, and foreign aid is, just logically, we're not going to have like a universal basic income for Africa funded by America. Nothing like that will ever happen. It can't. First of all, there's too many people. And second of all, politically, we can't do it. And third of all, like, there's lots of problems in the implementation of it. So that's never going to be like, Africans are never going to have like full automated luxury communism courtesy of the American dime, like on the American dime. That is not a thing that will ever happen. But we can provide a lot of jobs. And then AGOA is really the way to do that. And it really does result in tangible benefits. We should preferentially buy African-made stuff. And that's what we should do. In addition, by the way, I will say that there are some targeted foreign aid efforts to healthcare are pretty effective. So things like, we're going to give you bed nets for like, that's the famous one that the effective altruists talk about, right? There are a few things you can do, like you can do in-kind stuff. We're going to give you bed nets for malaria, blah, blah, blah. We're going to give you cheap drugs. We're getting like PEPFAR is this, here's free AIDS drugs, right? Remember back in the day, people are like, oh, you're going to charge Africans more than they can afford, so they all die of AIDS. And so this bleeding heart liberal named George W. Bush said, no, actually, we're going to give you free AIDS drugs. Here's free AIDS drugs. And so PEPFAR has just saved like tons of people in Africa. It's just this incredibly, and it didn't cost us much in the end, because those drugs actually aren't that expensive to make. Their marginal cost is low. All the cost was fixed costs of developing them in the first place. Like, okay, the government is just going to subsidize it. It doesn't cost much, and it saves a ton of lives. So there's a lot of sort of targeted health policies that we can do that actually do make a lot of difference. It's not just mailing a check to someone that's going to get appropriated by like the cousin of the president.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian. Let's end on this question. This question is from Max Rissman, Rissman. Max Rissman. Max says, I've just moved to Hartford, a troubled urban area, but that has been showing some signs of revitalization and has a lot of potential. I've become emotionally invested in seeing Hartford revitalized. But for the sake of making this question more relevant to other listeners, let's generalize it. If you were the mayor of a small U.S. city like Hartford that has lost population in the last several decades but has good bones, how would you maximize its prospects, attract new businesses and residents, and position it for the 21st century, etc.?
This is a great question. The first thing you need to do, so you need to do a couple things. The first thing you need to do is find a foundation. Find a rich foundation that, in the old days in the industrial, there was like the, Garbenflugen family who made, like steel widgets, and they had a bunch of money, and they established a foundation to like help Hartford. And that foundation has no idea of what to do. They're just sitting around Hartford or wherever. I could Google right now for who that foundation is in Hartford. I don't know, but there is one. There isn't always one. Some towns do not have one, but incredibly common. Then you go find whatever business leaders you can find, and you get them all together in a room. And also, if you have a hospital, you get the heads of the big hospital there. If you have a university, you absolutely get the heads of the university, like, university administrators, top university administrators, president, whatever. They're in a room. You get these people in a room and you say, we are going to fix our town together. We're going to have cooperation between all the people there. And then usually one person, occasionally two people, but usually there'll be one person who's incredibly dynamic and is like, I'm the person who's going to fix Hartford, going to fix this town. And they take point. And that person could come from the NGO sector, the foundation sector. That person could come from the academic sector. That person could come from the business sector. It's different in every town, but you're going to need, CEO of Hartford Incorporated. Then what you do then is you do a couple things. You do industrial policy. You figure out, we need some anchor industry. We're going to make small aircraft, or we're going to, like something, right? You're going to have, famously people do like universities and hospitals, but honestly, like more times than not, it's like, it's a small manufacturing thing, or like, we're going to be the town that makes glycine. You ever see those memes about that one Chinese company that makes glycine? Donghua Jinlong Glycine. Oh yeah, so people on TikTok just love this rando company that makes glycine in China, and in fact, we should have like little bowls of we should have be sponsored by Donghua Jinlong Glycine. It's just like some random company in like bumfuck nowhere China that makes this random food additive, and they're like, look at our awesome machine tool, and then people just make TikTok memes about them. So anyway, so they're get like a small anchor industry. Get an anchor industry, right? And then you need to do a couple things. You need to have specialized vocational training high schools for local people to work in that industry. So you need to have incentives, and the foundation can help with this. You need to have incentives to move that industry there. Okay. Then you need to, so we are the place of waiter robots that'll bring you your thing, right? Okay. So that's what you do in this town. Like that's what they make, or we make water pumps. Great. Or, some tentpole industry. And then you have, and it can be manufacturing, it can be service, it can be anything, right? But it's just something you can sell to the world. And then you have vocational training for local people to work in that industry. So basically you graduate high school and then you go to this intensive thing where it's like, okay, we're going to teach you how to work these machines, right? It's like German system, right? We're going to teach you how to work these machines. And then you revitalize downtown. The other thing you do is you revitalize downtown. You have a high street, okay? A high street is the British name for a thing that lots of places have. You have a street with shops with restaurants on it, and it's nice. And you have parking garages off the street where you can park and then walk onto the street. You don't have the parking garages right on the street, and basically you have a whole bunch of shops there on the street, and people can walk up and down that street. And then you get two streets. Then you get a cross street. Then you get a cross street. Eventually, you build up a block of downtown. Right, you build up blockwise, but you start with the high street, and you have a robust police presence to make sure that people aren't getting mugged on the high street, and you have high commercial density. You allow a lot of businesses there, like you change zoning laws to have lots of businesses there, so you have a nice downtown, and that nice downtown will be a place where people will want to be able to go out. Right, you go out to the downtown, and so that will really attract people to live there. Obviously, you want to reduce crime, all that stuff. But, you want to reduce corruption, not have people stealing all the money like they do in San Francisco and Chicago. But then, you essentially tentpole industry. So get all the stakeholders together, the foundations and the businesses and the universities and the government, right? Get everybody in a room, find the entrepreneur, who can handle this stuff. Attract a specific industry. Okay. Vocational training for that industry, and then revitalize your downtown. Do those 5 things, and you will revitalize your town.
Awesome. Thank you, Max, for the question. Well, that's the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone who submitted questions. Keep submitting questions, and we'll continue to go through them. Was your favorite one Gwyn's question about manufacturing, or the
Oh man, there were so many good ones. Actually, there were so many good questions today that I feel like people are asking all the big questions, and kind of I need to just sort of go write a post about these things, because I wrote a Bloomberg article 6 years ago about these things, and it was 800 words long. I need to write a new thing about here's how to revitalize your town. And by the way, that comes from James and Deborah Fallows. They're the ones who basically went around America finding to they flew in a small plane actually to dozens of towns in the Rust Belt and Central America, heartland of America that had revitalized themselves after being like sort of industrial decay and had bounced back. And essentially they all did the same thing.
Cool.
Anyway, but I love all these questions. These questions are absolutely great. You guys are asking great questions. There were not only were there not any dumb questions, there weren't even any boring questions. Like those were all such great questions. I'm blessed to have such great question askers.
Yeah, we have very smart listeners. Keep submitting questions and we'll do it again next week. Thank you, Noah, as always.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and erictornberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.